Got it.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As usual, I'm Michelle Teague from Teague of Your Own, and with me, as always, is my good friend Betty. Hi there, Betty.
Hi, I'm Betty Novak from Life Path Associates, and Michelle and I've been doing this for a while, and we love it.
Yeah, we have been doing this for a while now.
I
I think
know,
about it.
over a year at least.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
We bring up a lot of different topics, and we focus a lot on when we started Coffee with Two Coaches. The focus was on HR managers, on frontline managers, on people who, executives who needed help with what was going on there in the workplace. And so the topics that we cover have been varied throughout the time that we've done this. And what we're going to be talking about today, I think, is something that some people may be missing when it comes to leadership or when it comes to their workplace.
Yes,
And
that's true. And
yeah,
a lot, excuse me, I'm putting a pillow behind me.
sure.
A lot of my clients, I'm sure your clients, and when you're training leadership, they don't they don't understand empathy, and they also wonder why their communication is not doing what they want it to do with
Exactly.
maybe a team or a employee that may be sort of conflictive. And we usually go into empathy and two-way communication, but mainly
Yeah.
empathy, because that's the way to get things open. So we're going to talk more about that, but it's really one of the most important leadership and communication skills that you can develop and have.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't think there was so much of an emphasis on empathy in the past. And this is really something that has popped up probably within the past decade or so, as being an important trait for leaders to have.
I think more has been written on it in
Hmm.
the last decade. On Developed Dimensions International and other like Center for sorry Center for Career Leadership, um, and so forth. CCL, they like would train it,
Yes,
but it was like for an individual client. But
yes,
I'm seeing more written articles written about it. So it's sort of easier to send it to my clients to get them started.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. So why don't we start by first talking about what empathy actually is? Empathy is the ability to see things from another's perspective and feel their emotions. Putting yourself in another person's shoes might lead you to act with compassion and do what you can to improve their situation. So, in doing so, you can reduce the other person's distress as well as your own. Imagine that if you came home from work and your spouse or your partner wasn't feeling very well. Even if you are having a good day, you would suddenly feel distress and tend to their needs. If a friend is angry or upset about the way that a boss has treated them, you'd likely share their sense of frustration. Maybe you can't solve their problems, but you can at least understand where they're coming from and also understand that they need to vent their emotions. Empathy isn't just about hardships. When your child is excited about something and they're super proud of themselves, you feel that joy and you feel that pride. When your friend is laughing at a joke, you experience the amusement and the humor. Empathy allows you to deepen your relationships as you connect with friends and with loved ones. You connect with their thoughts, you connect with their feelings, and they connect with you. Empathy can extend to people you don't know all that well. You don't have to be best friends, or they don't have to be your children or your spouse or loved one. If you saw someone sitting alone at a party, for example, you might empathize with their loneliness and chat with them. If you see images of other people suffering on the other side of the world, you might be moved to donate resources to help alleviate their suffering. On the other hand, when you see televised crowd roaring with joy because, the Olympics are going on right now and they're super excited about their team winning, you can feel your own spirits rise. Their delight becomes your delight. So, Betty, now that we know what empathy is, how is this different from sympathy?
Well, often the two words are interchanged.
Mhm.
And when they are, the person doesn't get the same results as they thought they were going to get. And they may turn off a person. But empathy and sympathy doesn't involve sharing what someone else feels. It just sort of acknowledges something. Um, when you're sympathetic, you care about the other person's problem or misfortune and feel sorry for their suffering, but you don't fully feel their pain. And for instance, like when you send acknowledgement of somebody who's passed, are you going to send empathy or are you going to send sympathy? That's both of them are sent, but they are different with regards to how the person's going to read them. And so for instance, if you're sympathetic during that bereavement, you understand why they feel sad and are grieving, and you feel sorry for their loss because you're sort of feeling it a little bit. But if you're empathetic, you can also feel the grief that's going through. And so sympathy is more of a feeling of pity for the person, while empathy is more of a feeling of compassion for them. And so sympathy is good, but a lot of people don't want pity.
Right.
They don't mind hearing your compassion. So there are different components of empathy. Researchers tend to recognize at least two components of empathy. One is affective, and the other one is cognitive, and they're similar but really different. Affective is emotional empathy. It's the ability to feel what others are feeling. And if your spouse is stressed and sad, you might mirror their emotions. You may even mirror your body language some. If a friend is jovial and upbeat, you might find yourself grinning at their happiness because it's contagious. I mean, happiness is contagious. So, emotional empathy is very interesting, and it's about feelings, and people sometimes don't feel comfortable about sharing feelings or showing that they understand their feeling, the other person's feelings. Cognitive empathy is the ability to recognize and understand another person's mental state. So it gives you insight into the other person's perspective and emotions. If you recognize that your spouse is angry, you can predict that your joke isn't going to land well. And I've been there, done that. If you can tell that your friend is feeling happiness, you won't be surprised by their sudden outburst
Mhm.
because the emotion, but really the cognitive empathy, recognizing that they are really happy is going to, come out.
Mhm.
But there are two components of empathy, but the two components of empathy require different neural links in their brain. That's what the research showed. So it's possible to have high cognitive empathy, but low emotional empathy, and vice versa. And I think it depends on the person and their sort of personality and how they feel about themselves and others. So it's something you have to sort of learn and be able to work on because both are important.
Mhm.
Empathy difference between the sexes. And we started saying that because about saying my husband and if he's
Mhm.
angry, the joke's going to fall flat. Research shows that women are more likely to report feeling, and when they hear about the suffering of others, they show their feeling. This matches the results of a recent functional magnetic resonance imaging (MRI) study, which shows that female brains appear more receptive to feeling other people's pains. However, the study shows no difference between the sexes in cognitive empathy.
Mm.
And that's where I think sometimes when you're at work, somebody says, well, she has feelings and she's emotional and all that. But maybe that person is woman is showing more empathy than a man feels comfortable showing. And I found that to be true, actually. But you still have to, as a coach, we still have to train empathy and try to help males and be able, or even some females who are high on cognitive, try to work through and know when to use empathy and how to use it. And sometimes it's a little formulaic until they feel comfortable using it. Then it changes. They don't feel vulnerable using it.
Well, and one of the important parts to note is this is something that can be learned. While there are some innate traits here that we're talking about when we're talking about feelings and emotions and being able to recognize them, some people truly have this natural ability to do that. Other people can learn to be more empathetic. So why do we think empathy is so important, especially in the workplace? I understand when we're talking about personal relationships, but when we're looking at a professional relationship and we're looking at the workplace, empathy has an important role to play in your life, whether it's personal or professional. First, it can strengthen your bonds with the people that you interact with. As you try and understand others, you also make them feel heard and understood. And that's one of the things that we all want, especially at the workplace, is we want to feel like we're connecting with other people. We want to feel like they understand where we're coming from. They are more than likely to take the time to empathize with you as well when you take the time to feel and understand how they are. This deepens your relationships and promotes that feeling of connection that all of us desire. Research has shown that having a strong social support network tends to increase a person's happiness. And because empathy leads to better relationships, it can be a key component to building a more satisfying life, both at home and at work. So, here are some of the things that empathy can also do. It can motivate pro-social behavior, meaning that empathy can motivate you to take actions that improves the lives of other people. These actions might include anything from donating to a charity, to encouraging a friend to seek help for alcohol abuse, to simply comforting someone with a hug. Empathy can help guide decision making. In social situations, empathy can help you decide on the wisest course of action. If your spouse or partner seems stressed out from work, you can infer that it's not the best time to ask them to take on more responsibilities or to take out the trash. Uh,
You really.
Empathy can also help reduce burnout, and this is super important in today's workplace, where there are a lot of people who are suffering from burnout. There's a results from one study suggest that empathy might be useful in reducing burnout. And this is because empathy allows for more effective communication and collaboration, even in difficult work environments. So it can help diffuse some of the stress that people are feeling there in the workplace. And speaking of diffusing, empathy can help diffuse conflict. If you're in a bitter argument with a coworker, for example, empathizing with them can prevent you from being overly critical or needlessly cruel. Once you have a better understanding of someone else's perspective, it's easier to move on to proposing a compromise with them so that everybody gets something out of this and it's just not a win-lose proposition.
Yeah, one time I was asked to be the interim director for the training division for my agency. And it was interesting because we had a woman who was very unhappy at our agency. You could tell. And she would show her anger in public,
Mm.
and then she would also go into her office and close the door, which wasn't healthy. And so something happened, and it happened on my watch. Nothing that I had anything to do, but I had to take care of it. And I used a lot of empathy to get her to leave her anger as much as she could and try to figure out what was wrong and what would she like
Right.
to do that would be more helpful. And what it ended up being that she wanted to go to another agency on an internship, but and she did, and then she ended up staying there, and they loved her. So it's one of those things that if you can't get in any of the feelings out or anything out, it's going
Mhm.
to create you won't get anywhere with it.
No.
So you were talking about what's your next thing to do, speak to a licensed therapist, right?
Exactly. Well, actually, what are some of the signs that you or a loved one might lack empathy, Betty? What is it that people should be looking for if we want to see examples of lacking empathy?
Well, empathy isn't something that you either have or you don't, like we've been saying.
Mhm.
Some people have a high degree of empathy, while others have lower empathy. And sometimes what people says, oh, she really feels, or he really understands what the other people are going through. And that's empathetic to a certain extent. Now, if your empathetic abilities are in the lower end of the spectrum, you might feel indifferent to other people's pains. And we've seen people say, well, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if for example, if a friend's house is burglarized, you might say or think, well, that wouldn't have happened if you were more careful or you'd had some sort of system. Um, or maybe you look down on family members who are dealing with financial hardship and chalk it up to their failure to work hard. You might even hold the misguided belief that bad things like that would never happen to you. And I won't go into it, but I've been on the other end of that thing from my sister and
Mhm.
other people. But I had to just, be strong and just say, well,
Yeah.
that's what they think. Low empathy can also lead you to believe that people around you are too sensitive. You might consistently be surprised that your friends are offended by your jokes. Maybe you don't understand how your words and actions wound loved ones.
Mhm.
This can lead to all sorts of arguments and misunderstandings. And so people, will say, well, you don't listen to what you say,
Yeah.
you know. And did you see your sister or did you see your coworker and their face when you were doing this?
Mhm.
No. So if you have low empathy, you might have a lack of patience when dealing with people who are in distress. Perhaps your go-to piece of advice for people is just get over it.
Mhm.
Despite this, often people say that, or just
Yep.
go and deal with it. Despite this, you tend to hold grudges and don't forgive people for mistakes. You never seem to have the time or bandwidth to listen to other people's perspectives or reflect on their emotional states. And we see a lot of that. People are saying that this society is very unempathetic. They
Mhm.
aren't even really sympathetic. They're just narcissistic. But so look around you. Try to
Mhm.
be more empathetic. Try to be more empathetic with your family members because people are going through some tough times. And also at work when somebody just is discouraged. So, um, recognizing a lack of empathy in others. Um, if a loved one is lacking empathy, you're likely to have some turbulent interactions. Yes, maybe an argument or two. You might be impatient, overly critical, leading to you feeling as if you were walking on eggshells.
Mhm.
Your husband sometimes can do that.
Mhm.
You might notice that they're constantly dismissing your problems and tuning out when you talk about your feelings. People aren't very comfortable with feelings.
Mhm.
You might feel unheard of or start to question if you really are being too sensitive. Realize that their lack of empathy is an issue only they can
Yeah.
correct, and that you feeling more feelings is healthy.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And you're right. This is something that individuals have to work on themselves. You can't fix this for them.
And we're
Uh,
not talking about you crying
no.
with feelings. It's more of a communication and a
Mhm.
body language type of thing.
Yeah. So, what are some of the causes for lack of empathy? In some circumstances, it's natural to feel low empathy. You might have a hard time empathizing with somebody who bullied you or mistreated your loved ones. This could be a situational lack of empathy and not reflective on how well you empathize with people in general. The other thing is that certain experiences might decrease your empathy. For example, some research indicates that empathy can decline as medical students go through training. And this is interesting because it might be due to burnout as medical students struggle with stressful workloads and increased responsibility. They might also use emotional detachment to protect themselves from psychological distress while on the job or maintain professionalism when dealing with patients. And I saw that when I worked in senior living and in healthcare, where you would have nurses, you would have caregivers who would have to distance themselves from some of the people that they were taking care of because uh, you're in situations where, especially in senior living, not everybody's going to come out of this in a good place. Not everybody is going to walk out of there healthy and happy. You're going to have people who die in senior living communities. You're going to have people who die in healthcare facilities, and people in the medical field know that you can feel compassion and you can feel sympathy and you can feel you can be empathetic, but you also have to move on to the next person that you have to take care of. And so they get this sense of detachment from the people that they're taking care of when things happen like that.
I think it affects also your relationship to a doctor.
Mhm.
Your doctors, I mean, there's some that I've said they're so cold, I don't know. Or I'm saying he or she's a specialist, so they don't have time. But once in a but I like, I like my general practitioner to be empathetic.
Mhm.
And also the specialist, if something is happening to me and it's not, you know, so you either bond with somebody or you don't, and usually I fire them if that's the case. I don't expect them to, hug me or whatever. It's just I want you to listen to me,
Yeah.
not make me feel like I'm imagining things.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, you also want, like you said, you want them to listen to you because their job is to help you figure out what's right and what's wrong. And if they're not listening to you, if they're not paying attention to what it is that you're saying, you're not just a list of symptoms. You're an actual person. And so they need to be able to have empathy. They need to be able to see things from your perspective when it comes to helping to come up with a plan to treat what it is that you have.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I just have to say, one of the things that's really a very interesting addition to medical practice is the idea of portals
Mm,
with email, because really I don't overly do it.
yeah,
But if I'm making notes about something that's happened to me over a certain period of time, I'll send it to my doctor.
yeah,
And then he or his nurse practitioner will send me a message, or they'll call me, which makes me feel really good because
yeah,
I don't want to miss anything, but I don't want to be overly like, scared or anything.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So we've talked all about what sympathy is and what empathy is and what they are and what they're not. But there are other things that are involved with this.
Mhm.
Several mental health conditions, developmental disorders, and personality disorders might involve low empathy. And I won't go into the criminal element or anything like that.
Yeah.
Borderline personality disorder, the BPD,
Mhm.
involves intense insecurity, extreme emotional swings, and an unstable self-image. So people with this may have a normal level of cognitive empathy, which is the one that is more surface, but difficulty with emotional empathy. So the other one is narcissistic personality disorder, and
Mhm.
that thing has been thrown around a whole bunch around a certain person.
Yes.
So, but really, narcissists often exhibit a pattern of extreme self-centeredness and arrogance, as well as a high need for admiration. Some research shows that people with MPD may have low empathy, perhaps specifically emotional empathy. It also is possible that they have a degree of empathy, but little motivation to act on these feelings.
Mm.
And, you can, in what's in the news now, you can understand who's being emotionally empathetic and who's being cognitively empathetic.
Yes.
Like, thank goodness they're being empathetic
Yes.
and just not ignoring everything. So the other one is Machiavellianism. And I can never say this word, Machiavellianism. This is a personality trait that involves a tendency to be manipulative and disregard morality. I mean, Machiavelli was really a real brute of a
Yeah.
ruler.
Yeah.
And so and he did not care about anybody. And if anything, he was cruel to the max. So that's why we call it Machiavellianism. So people with this trait may have a low drive to act on empathy. They just aren't empathetic. Psychopathy. Psychopathy is a disorder characterized by callousness and antisocial behavior. So lack of emotional empathy, but not necessarily cognitive empathy, is a hallmark of this disorder. And then the last is altruism and empathy. I'm sorry, altruism, autism and empathy. There's a common myth that autistic individuals lack empathy. That's true, but that's not true. Some, but not all autistic people may struggle with cognitive empathy. For example, an autistic person may have trouble immediately pinpointing why another person is upset. That's true. They might even have a hard time expressing a response that matches social norms. This shouldn't be confused with lack of caring. And I've known a number of autistic young people, and that's true. They're slow in responding. They don't always identify the feelings that are going on. And sometimes they recede into themselves because they aren't sure what they're supposed to do. But you can tell when some autistic persons are have been trained or developed an empathetic way, and they're more likely to interact better with people. And you sort of don't know they're autistic, actually.
Yeah, our daughter, Katie, is on the barely there autistic end of the spectrum. She has what's called oppositional defiance disorder. And we figured this out when she was in about first, second grade. Because her favorite word is no. What I always thought was interesting is, like you said, a lot of people think that people with autism lack empathy, and that's not true. I can very clearly remember we were at a high school football game because her older brother, Jeffrey, he was in band. And so every Friday night we were at a football game watching the football team, but also, watching the band at halftime. So during the game, we would usually walk around because she'd get bored after a while. And we were walking, and over the loudspeaker, it said, Latrobe's calling their last time out for the night. And she turned to us and said, "Oh, they're going to timeout. They must be sad." And while she has no earthly idea what they were talking about with timeout during a football game,
But
that shows you
mhm.
she did indeed have empathy. She could empathize with people who were being put into timeout, and
Yep,
thinking that they were going to be sad because they were in timeout. So, you can't characterize people with autism as not having empathy. Sometimes it just takes them longer to be able to identify the emotion itself and to be able to share that type of perspective.
that's true. That's a wonderful story. Great. That's good. So, so this is the end of our first part of
Yeah.
empathy.
Yeah.
And
And
next time we're going to go to part two.
yep. Yep, we've covered a lot. We've talked about, what empathy is, how empathy and sympathy are very different. We've talked about why empathy is so important, especially there in the workplace. Signs that people may lack empathy, some causes of lack of empathy, and some of the conditions that might involve low empathy. So next time, we're going to be talking more about how you can build up the empathy.
Mhm.
So if you recognize that either you or somebody that you know has very low empathy, there are some things you can do to build it up. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2 of this discussion is how to build up empathy. So thanks once again for joining us.
Yep.
Look be on the lookout for part 2 that'll come out later this month, and we hope to see you then, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.